Hello and welcome everyone. In this video, we'll look at how to programmatically interact with ComfyUI. In my previous video, if you've been following the series, I've shown you how to set up the Linux AI server with a quad NVIDIA 3090 GPU rig. This is an overkill. You do not need that much powerful GPU for what we are doing. Nice to have thing. But you can follow this guide to set up your Linux server. In the next video, I show you how to set up ComfyUI with OpenWebUI. And in the last video, I've shown you what ComfyUI is, went into details of each and every boxes that you can see over here. In this video, we'll see how you can develop an application like Dream Canvas, which I have developed over here, and the code for which is freely available on github.com, right? So you can go to github.com, teachings, Dream Canvas, and you can freely use this code for this application that I'm showing to you. Before we build an application like that, so Dream Canvas is a complex application which involves UI elements, it involves a backend server, it involves a fast API endpoints and router concepts and services and all that. But in order for us to build such an application, we first need to understand how would you programmatically interact with ComfyUI? How would you create a simple Python program which will let you interact with the ComfyUI server, which is what I want to show to you first. So in my previous video, I've shown you like if you generate a particular workflow, right? So all these boxes and elements that are laid out on this UI, they are called a workflow. And if you want to save a workflow that you have made, in our case, we'll just take this basic simple workflow, right? The one that comes by default out of the box. We'll take this particular workflow and we will save it, right? So we'll create workflow.json file that we get by clicking on this save button, and we get this workflow.json file, right? So we can save it, and if I open this workflow.json, you will see it has all the content in a JSON format over here. However, so let's see this. There is a clip text encode. So there is a clip text encode box over here, and you have all these things over here. However, the key point is that this is not the JSON file that is used when you are programmatically trying to interact with ComfyUI. And this is sometimes confusing to a lot of people that, hey, why would we have a JSON file available to us that we cannot use? And if not this JSON file, then which JSON file can we actually use, right? So just follow along what I'm doing right now, and it'll make sense when I show you the Python code over here, right? So you have an option to save this JSON, but this is not the JSON that you want to use. Then what is the JSON that we want to use? That JSON is called the API JSON, right? And how would you find that? So you would go to your settings, and then in your search settings, just type API, and you have to enable this development mode, right? So you have to enable this. And then once you enabled it, you saw that this particular box showed over here. I'm going to disable and enable again, and you will see this save API format. And once you do that, this button will show up. And now when you click on this particular save, it saves as workflow_API.json file, right? So this is very important, workflow_API. I mean, the name could be anything, doesn't matter, but this is the file that you want to save. So let me save this over here, and let me open this file for you. And you'd see that this file is very similar to what we had earlier, right? I mean, it is still in a JSON format, and it still has all these texts and stuff over here, right? So beautiful scenery, nature glass and all that. However, there is one key difference in this particular file, right? So let me see if I can make it bigger. Can I make it bigger? There must be a way. Maybe Control Plus. Nope, doesn't make it bigger. That's fine. Preferences, font, there we go. Let's make it 16, right? Okay, all right, that's big enough. So in this particular JSON, these attributes are labeled as 3. If you see 4, 5, and go all the way till 9, right? So each node is actually labeled by its number. So it goes from 3 to 9. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So there are 7 attributes, and it starts from 3 and goes up until 9 over here, right? So this is what we see. The save image part of it is the 9th one over here, this one. And the very first one is the load checkpoint box of it, right? So the number 3 is the load checkpoint box of it. And if you can see, it says the checkpoint name, the flux1 dev fp8 save tensors is the one that is chosen over here, right? So if I use this particular workflow API JSON, then this is the one that the API requires, right? So there is an API that our ComfyUI exposes, and it expects this workflow API JSON as the payload to it. So this is the payload that you'll be sending to the API endpoint. And this is very important, because if you send the regular workflow JSON, the one that you generate from the save, the regular workflow JSON, not the API format, you will get a 500 error, because the API does not understand that payload. It only understands this payload. And this is a big point of confusion for a lot of initial development phase, because many people just try to use the regular workflow.json and not the API formatted one, this one. All right, enough of that. Let me close this. So once you have created your workflow, you have saved the API format workflow, now you can start writing your code, right? So what I would do is I would route you to this main.py file, right? And you can read through this file at your ease. And I'm gonna run this file, and I have put pauses at multiple places over here. And when I run this file, I'll explain what is actually going on in the background. So you'll see that there is not much that we have imported over here, right? So we have WebSockets, UUID, JSON, URL lib, right? For parsing, some random pill we have done, because we need pillow for importing image, right? Term color to make the terminal prompts like the printout pretty, .env to read the environment variable. So there is no special library that we have used over here. It is just doing a request to our ComfyUI server, and it is sending that particular workflow in the API formatted JSON request, and we are getting the response back. And that is it. That is it. And the endpoint that we have is our server address / prompt endpoint, right? So we'll take a look. We'll take a look at how it is all running when I actually run this particular file. So there is a requirements.txt provided over here. So you can create a conda environment and you can run it. And there is also a very detailed README file provided over here. So this README is catered towards the Dream Canvas application. But if you want to read it, then you will see how you can set up everything. So in the next video, actually, I'll talk about Dream Canvas. In this video, I will only talk about this main.py, so that you get an idea on how you set up an application in a command line when you're trying to interact with ComfyUI. So this is the API reference guide in a way for your ComfyUI interactions. Okay, so let's run this main.py file, and you will see each and every step one by one how the application is working, right? So let's do that. So Python main.py will initiate the application over here for us, right? So there's nothing fancy going on. I have just I am in the Conda environment that has all the requirements installed, right? So all you have to do is to pip install -r requirements.txt in a particular conda environment, and you can see that these are just the simple requirements over here. And once you have your conda environment activated, how do you do that? Just follow the readme file, and in the readme file there is at the very top, it shows you how you can create the conda environment, right, and activate the conda environment. In this case, it asks you to choose the name Dream Canvas. I just happen to have a different conda environment called LangGraph, which works too for me. So I'm just going to use that. But you can follow this. You can create a Dream Canvas conda environment, and you can install the requirements in there, and then you can run Python main.py, right? So once you run this file, the file will actually guide you through. It will guide you through how you are going to generate an image by interacting programmatically with ComfyUI, right? So we first initialize the connection, right? So in this very first step, we are initializing the connection settings and loading the environment. So all the in the .env file, which holds the key configuration values such as ComfyUI server details, and some other attributes too, which we'll talk about later. But essentially, the ComfyUI server details is what main.py application is concerned with. So let me open this particular env file, and you will see that it does have some other Olama server details and Olama model, but these are catered towards the other application that we have, the Dream Canvas application. But this is the only attribute, the ComfyUI server address, that is being read by our main.py application. So if you see at the bottom where we have paused our application, we have paused it at step number 1. So our step number 1 is right here. On the top. So even though the program that we are calling calls the system over here, but in reality, if you see the step number 1 where we are pausing our script, right? So step number 1 is right here, where we are actually initializing the connection settings and loading the environment variable. So this is a Python script. Python script goes top down, right? So it is a script. So at the very first step over here, we are loading the configuration from .env file by doing the load.env, and then we are getting the server address. And if you have not provided the server address in .env, then it just uses localhost 8188 as a default address. And then we are setting the client ID using the random number generator over here, right? So UUID, and then we are generating this particular UUID over here. And then we're just printing out the server address, client ID, and that is what you are seeing over here. So the key to note is that we generate this unique client ID using the UUID library, right? So this client ID ensures that every session that we start with the server is unique, which is important for tracking our specific requests, right? So the OS library helps us to interact with systems environment variables, and it is particularly useful when building applications that need to be having some flexible access across environments, right? So when we are developing for production and development environments, we can provide different .env files for different environments, and we can reuse our code. So this is a very useful technique. If you haven't been using it, then I highly encourage you to use the .env files in your applications. All right. So once you have initialized the connection settings and all that, then let's hit enter over here to continue, right? So now we are being presented with the positive prompt question that, hey, enter what you actually want to see. So the positive prompt is what on the ComfyUI you see over here. So this is the positive prompt. But we'll take a look at how this positive prompt actually get mapped to the workflow.json, because remember, we have saved the workflow API, right? So what we have to do is in the saved workflow API, we have to, we can collect the attributes on our Python program. And then one way or the other, we have to take these attributes and insert it into our workflow API JSON file. And then we will use that JSON file to send as a payload to our server endpoint, ComfyUI server endpoint. So that's what we are doing over here. We are collecting the attributes that we want to merge into our JSON file. So let's say the attribute is eye of Sauron, right? So we put this as a positive prompt. What we don't want is mountains, and that's it. So positive and negative prompts, and this is where we'll pause, and the system note says that the user inputs for the positive and negative prompt generations have been collected over here now, right? And you hit enter, and you will see that this is where we establish the WebSocket connection, right? So let's go and let's find this step 3 over here so you can see it. So now let me see step 3, right? So this is where we are in the generate images over here. We are establishing the WebSocket connection, and this WebSocket connection is to the server address that we are picking up from .env file, right? /ws client ID, and this is the client ID that we have generated using the UUID. Okay, so now that we have established the WebSocket connection over here, we have a persistent two-way communication channel with the server. Now, this allows us to send and receive the data in real time without needing to repeatedly make multiple HTTP requests. So in our case, the WebSockets will be used to send our image generation request to the ComfyUI server and receive the progress updates as the image is being generated. So I hit enter over here, and now the workflow.json file. So right, I've just renamed my workflow underscore API.json to workflow.json file, but this is the API formatted JSON file that we have saved, and I have kept it in the same folder over here, right? So in workflow.json file, I've kept it over here. So this is the point where the workflow.json file is loaded the way we have saved it, right? So let's take a look at the saved workflow.json file. So if you'll see, this is the original file that we have saved. And in this file, all the data, this is the time when I saved it. This is the details that I had put: gorgeous woman, blonde, and this is the positive prompt. And was there a negative prompt that I also put? I don't remember. So probably no negative prompt. I think this is the section 7, and it has no negative prompt over here. Clip text in code. Yep. So there was no negative prompt probably, and that is why. And yeah, so this was the original workflow.json file, but all this data will be replaced, and we will see. So in line item number 6, this particular text exists, right? So for positive prompt, and in 7, there is the text for negative prompt, and there is no negative prompt over here as of now. So let's take a look over here in our code. So this file actually defines the structure that the ComfyUI understands, the payload that ComfyUI understands. And this is where the JSON library is being used, right? So even in the rendering of this, if you see, I've used the JSON dumps over here to render it. So it nicely presents on the terminal. So even though it is a terminal application, we can still make it look pretty. Now that we have loaded our workflow.json file, we are ready to customize it with the data that we have, right? So what data have we collected? So we have the data Eye of Sauron, right? Mountains as the negative prompt. And I haven't provided the ability to customize the steps for generation and resolution. We can provide that as inputs over there, but for the purpose, I have just hard coded it to these two attributes, and the random seed also to this attribute. I mean, I have generated the random seed, but I have not provided user the ability to enter it. But these are the attributes that we will be configuring our current config.json file, right? So if you see, the way we are configuring our config.json file is, so if I do workflow, and you will see what we are doing is we are taking certain sections of this workflow. So the section number 6, which was the positive prompt, input text, we are replacing with the positive prompt that we have collected, right? And then again, 7, input text, we are replacing with the negative prompt that we have collected. Now, this particular workflow.json that you see, and this code will only work for the default workflow.json. So you have to have the same default workflow.json. If you have customized your workflow, then you will have different nodes doing different things. So you will have to change this based on your own workflow.json, right? So you see that I'm setting the positive and negative prompt in the right spots over here. So number 6 and number 7. And you can see that from over here that number 7 and number 6 were the ones for your positive and negative prompts, right? So, oh, I do have a text of watermark and text, right? So this is what I'm replacing. So in 6 inputs text, I'm replacing this particular element, right? So if you see 6 inputs text, I'm replacing that particular element. And this is how this whole code is working, that whichever attribute in the workflow.json you want to replace, you can just go in and you can replace it with the data that you have collected, right? Okay, so now when I hit enter over here, this has replaced the config.json with these attributes, and it has queued the prompt over there. And you can now see the new config.json file that it is sending, right? So it has changed the section number 6, positive prompt with Eye of Sauron, and 7, what you don't want to see, negative prompt with mountains, and this is it, right? And then 5 and 2 and all that, it has replaced 2, the width and height, and the random seed, if you see, that has been replaced as well, right? So all those attributes have been replaced, and let's hit enter, and it is starting to listen, and it is generating so there was a WebSocket connection, and WebSocket connection received the updates, and you saw all the updates coming in, and the execution is complete. And now it is fetching the history and downloading the image. So what happens is that these get queued on the server, right? So there is a API endpoint where you submit this particular format with a client ID, and then you go reach out to with the WebSocket connection. You can read the progress of it, and then you reach out to the history endpoint, and you get the image back from the history endpoint for this particular client ID, right? So I'm gonna hit enter, and you will see that fetching the history for the prompt ID of this, not the client ID, prompt ID. And then for this particular prompt ID, you can fetch the image from the server, and then you will save the image locally over here on our folder, the outputs folder over here. So I'm gonna hit enter. So WebSocket connection is being closed, and I'm gonna hit enter, and it is saving the file, and I'm gonna hit enter to get out of it. So you saw that this particular file got created as soon as I exited the application. Let's go in here and let's take a look at this file. So this is the Eye of Sauron that it thought is, right? So it's a very, very interesting Eye of Sauron. I wouldn't say it is Eye of Sauron, but this is what the AI image thinks that Eye of Sauron looks like without mountains. So now if I encourage you to go in and to take a look at this code. It is structured in a very detailed way with a lot of comments, with very structured flow. So you can go step by step to the script, and you can just find that particular step over here in the code, and you can very easily understand what's going on. The focus of this thing is this particular method, generate image method, that takes in positive, negative steps and resolution, right? And the default value of steps and resolution is being provided over here, and positive and negative prompt I'm actually collecting from user and then passing along in the generate images method. So what you would see is that we open up a WebSocket connection, which is important, and we replace, right? So we replace the collected input in the workflow.json file by physically replacing them, right? So we take the workflow.json, we load it from our local folder, right? So we open up the local workflow.json file, and we read that particular data from workflow.json, and then we load that data over here, right? So we take this workflow.data and we read it, and then we load the JSON formatted workflow in this JSON object over here, and then we start replacing the elements of that JSON, which is the most important aspect to understand over here. And once you replace any element that you want, right? So your final objective is to construct this workflow underscore API.json that you had saved from the ComfyUI. Right? So your objective is to construct that, and which is what you are doing over here by replacing these elements, positive, negative prompts, and any other element that you want, right? If you have multiple models stored, then you can go in and you can also replace that particular model too. What I mean by that is there was a section over here that had the checkpoint name. So in number 4, inputs checkpoint name, you can switch the model programmatically also over here, right? So all this application lets you do, the command line application lets you do. And then what you are doing is you are calling the get images method. You are passing the WebSocket connection over there and this particular workflow that you have constructed, right? So let's go to the get images, and this is where you are queuing the prompt. So while you're queuing the prompt, you are actually sending, let's go into this method and you will see. So when you're queuing the prompt, you are actually sending the request to /prompt endpoint, which is the endpoint where you will submit your workflow.json, right? So you are the workflow that you have constructed, you are sending that workflow over here. All right, so this is how your application is working essentially end to end. You are queuing your workflow.json requests, and you are essentially then getting the data back out from the save endpoint that we had seen over there, right? So let me just name it correctly. So it wasn't the save, it was called something else, view. So you are fetching the images from that view endpoint over here. All right. The way this is working is, so let's go back to this get images. So we had queued the prompt, and we have the prompt ID now. And then what we do is we wait for that WebSocket connection to finish, and that's where you were seeing the percentage moving on the UI on the command line. And then once your whole execution is done, that is when we are fetching the view endpoints, the saved image from the view endpoint, right? So this is where our view endpoint, which was in the get image. So I'm gonna try to find the get image implementation over here. Just a second. So we get the WebSocket connection, and we see the percentages, and then once we have the percentage, yep, this is all just for the printing of the percentage, and execution complete, we get over here, and then we fetch the history and download the image. We get the history for that particular prompt, and there is a view image or get image, right? So this particular endpoint, and let's go to this endpoint, and in the get image endpoint we have /view, right? So we have /u, and we pass in our URL value, and we get the data back, and that's where we get the image back, right? So so in the end, this get view endpoint is invoked to get the final image back that was queued for generation on the server. So there are multiple steps that are involved. There is a step for queuing it. There is a step for getting the history for the prompt. And then using that history for the prompt, then there's a step for actually getting the image out using the /view. And if you utilize this particular flow that I have presented over here step by step, then you will see exactly how the image is being generated, and how you can utilize such a flow to create your own application. And what I've done is then, as a next step, I have put this whole process behind a fast API endpoint, where generation of an image, all these steps that you are seeing over here, generation of an image is put behind a fast API endpoint. And then I've created a client server application that has a UI, which is the Dream Canvas application. So there is a UI sitting in the front, and it is interacting with the fast API application. So I'll talk about Dream Canvas in detail in the next video, but in this video, hopefully this helps you in understanding how end-to-end you can interact with a ComfyUI server, how you can download the workflow API .json file, and how you can supply it to your Python script, how you can load the JSON, how you can modify that JSON, because that JSON is your payload to the server. And then generating the image is essentially a 3-step process where you queue the prompt, you get the history, and then you retrieve the image from the view endpoint, and then you present it back to the user by saving it on your disk over here in this case. All right, that is it. In the next video, I'll talk about how the Dream Canvas application is set up using this script as a service, right? So in one of the services, I have used this script's logic, and I have provided API front end for that, right? So there are some API routes that I have provided for that, and I'll talk in detail in the next video. Thank you so much for watching this one, and I will see you in the next one.